Hey everybody, and welcome to this special on Saturn's conjunction to Neptune that happens on the 20th of February 2026. So this is when structure and routine dissolves into the dream, right? So Saturn conjunct Neptune on the 20th of February reminds you that you didn't heal it. You spiritually bypassed it, you transcended it instead of integrating it, and now it's back, demanding actual work. February the 20th, 2026, when Saturn's at their exact conjunction with Neptune, is saying the fantasy has to dissolve, the waiting ends, and reality has stopped negotiating with you, because spirituality without material action, without practical action, is just hope with incense, right? You've been meditating, manifesting, rising your vibration, thinking it would save you from dealing with money, boundaries, and the hard work of building a life. You've been using divine timing as an excuse not to take action, and now you're realizing divine timing doesn't exist. Just timing, that's all we've got. And you've been waiting whilst others were building. So your meditation practice, Saturn reminds us that may be actually dissociation, the high vibe only. That's actually emotionally, spiritually, and psychological bypassing. The manifestation practice that lets you avoid building an actual life is not a spiritual practice, it's just avoidance. Now, whether you're self-partnered or not, Saturn's conjunction to Neptune asks us all, can you be the partner to yourself that you've been waiting for someone else to be? Can you commit to yourself the way you dream someone will commit to you? Is your primary relationship with you? That's what Saturn conjunct Neptune wants us to get really deep into the questions of, are we really manifesting by taking practical action, or are we just avoiding? Now, some of you may be in your late 30s or early 40s and realize the spiritual practice you built isn't grounded in reality. It's floating, beautiful maybe, but not connected to the material world you actually live in. So Saturn's conjunction to Neptune is asking, can your spiritual practice include your medication? Although you may be spiritually aware, it doesn't mean that you may not need to take, anxiety or any medication, It's asking, can your mysticism include your therapist? Can you be devoted to something larger than yourself and still need professional help? February the 20th is when spiritual practices meet reality, and Saturn conjunction to Neptune grounds our spiritual practice and asks us to get real on what we need to do to include spiritualism into our day-to-day life. So whether you're ready or not, Saturn's exact conjunction to Neptune on the 20th of February 2026 tells us and says integration, not transcendent. So if you just wanted the 5-minute version, there it was. So I'm Imani, your karmic astrological life coach, and now I'm gonna dive deeper, layer by layer, on all things Saturn conjunct Neptune. So the lie that gets exposed during Saturn's conjunction to Neptune is, I need to transcend, rise above my human experience. Yes, we may be higher consciousness souls, in the human body, but we are here to not only express our souls, but also experience being human as well. So some of you may have been doing the work for years: therapy, meditation, plant medicine, energy healing, tarot, somatic work, and shadow integration, and all the other tools and paths we can all go down when we're on the spiritual path. Maybe you've read all the books, listened to all the podcasts, taken all the courses, done all the things, and yet the fantasy is still running. The one where if you just get spiritual enough, healed enough, conscious enough, everything will finally work out. where the universe will reward your dedication with ease, where transcendence will save you from having to build an actual life. So this week, during Saturn's conjunction to Neptune, that fantasy ends, it dissolves. So as I said, some of you may be in your late 30s or early 40s, but it doesn't matter how old you are, but you're realizing the spiritual practice you built isn't grounded in reality. It's floating, beautiful, yes, as I said, but not connected to the material world where you actually live in. And some of you may have thought if you meditated enough, manifested enough, raised your vibration enough, you wouldn't have to deal with money or boundaries or challenging, difficult conversations or the hard work of building a sustainable, long-term structure, routine, practical day-to-day living, So maybe some of you are single or self-partnered and have been waiting for the spiritual practice that you practice to deliver the partner, the career, the life that you want, and it hasn't, because spirituality without material, practical action is just hope with incense, as I said. Some of you have been using divine timing as an excuse not to take action, and now you realise divine timing doesn't exist, just timing, and you've been waiting whilst others were building. So some of you thought the therapy worked, the wound healed, the pattern, it's broken, and then this transit arrives and you discover you didn't heal it, you just spiritually bypassed it, you went beyond it, you transcended it instead of integrating. So you pushed it down, you pretended it weren't happening, you said things like, I'm vibing high and I can't feel this emotion, I don't feel this emotion, and you got good at ignoring your emotions but maybe not doing the shadow work, and now the trauma, it's back demanding the actual work. And this isn't just another growth opportunity, this is the structure, the routine that Saturn's bringing, reminding us of the things that were built on fantasy, which are now finally meeting reality. And reality doesn't negotiate, it wants us to deal, it wants us to get real with, yes, we can do all the spiritual things, but we still have to deal with the practical things, right? So now I'm just going to give you the transit snapshot, the quick reference of all the astrological things that are happening during Saturn's conjunction to Neptune, which is exact on February the 20th, 2026 at 4:52 p.m. It entered on the 7th of February and it's going to leave us at 19:39, so 7:39 p.m. GMT on the 4th of March. So they're both in the 7th degree of Pisces. And as I said, the core wound that this transit is exposing is the need to transcend, rise above your human experience by ignoring it. And it protects our discomfort with living through our pain, the embodiment of it, the fear of material reality and the avoidance of practical work. And this manifests as, spiritual bypassing, dissociation, disguised as meditation, using high vibe language to avoid dealing with our actual psychological, emotional and spiritual problems. And it wants us and brings the truth of the matter that we have to integrate our humanness with our spirituality rather than go beyond it and try to transcend it. So we need to remember that spirituality includes our body, our bills and our boundaries, right? So the aspects that are also influencing the supporting cast of this Saturn and Neptune conjunction is Juno making a quintile, a nice subtle creative aspect with Saturn and Neptune, and this brings creative tension around commitment, contracts, relationships and our routines. And then we've got Saturn and Neptune making a semi-square to the midhaven, and this brings minor friction between our spiritual ideals and our public image and the reality of our career, right? And then we've got Saturn and Neptune making a set star to Pluto, and this is an ongoing aspect, right? And this allows for deep changes and transformation if we're willing to work for it, right? And then we've got a trine between Black Moon Lilith and Saturn and Neptune, and this brings gentle support for saddle work. And then we've got some transiting aspect patterns that are intensifying this energy. So yeah, we've got 4 T-squares. So we've got the Sun in Aquarius, Uranus in Taurus, and the Ascendant in Leo. And this is drawing our attention to breakthroughs in our behaviour versus, just sticking to our comfort zone. And we may become a bit imbalanced because of this energy, but I'm going to go in depth about all these aspects and transiting patterns a bit later on. This is just a snapshot. And then we've got Mars in Capricorn, Uranus in Taurus, and the Ascendant in Leo in the T-square. So this is reminding us of taking action versus resisting taking action, right? And then we've got a T-square between Juno in Sagittarius, the Moon in Pisces, and Jupiter in Gemini, and this is drawing our attention to commitment and growth. And then we've got the South Node in Leo, Lilith in Scorpio, the Sun, and Pallas in Aquarius, and this is bringing attention to our past patterns that we need to let go of. And then we've got a false hammer between the South Node in Leo, Lilith in Scorpio, Chiron and Ceres in Pisces, and this is bringing the pressure to finally confront the wounds that we've been avoiding. And then we've got 2 stelliums in Aquarius with the Sun Pallas in the North Node and Venus Pallas in the North Node, and bringing that future focused energy that demands us to stop living in fantasy and supports us in grounding our actions and lives in practical reality, right? So although the exact intensity is on the 19th to the 21st of February, we're going to get the full juice of Saturn's conjunction to Neptune from the 10th of February to the 1st of March. So the integration period of this energy is March right up until the end of April. And it happens in the Nakshatra Uttra Bhadrapada, Pada 2, and Saturn actually rules this Pada as well, and the deity of this Nakshatra is Aha Bandanya, which is the serpent of the deep waters, and the motivation of this energy is desire channeled into spiritual depth. So channeling our sexual desires, every desire, pleasure desire, Neptune energy at the worst end, is responsible for addictive behaviours, so whether it's overindulging in drugs and alcohol, sex or whatever. So the comma here is desire channeled into spiritual depth, and the medicine is, the foundations, the daily routines that holds the mystery, that holds our spirituality and structure and day-to-day routines that allow us to go deep as well. So the Sabian symbol where Saturn and Neptune conjunct at 7th degree of Pisces, the cross lying on the rocks, right? It rules the right talus, which is the ankle bone in our human body that bears the weight, as we walk, whilst allowing us to move, allowing motion. So the traditional meaning of this Sabian symbol is the burden of spiritual responsibility meets harsh reality, the reality of day-to-day living, right? Yes, we can be spiritual beings, but we have to deal with the majority of the world and the energy and the structures and the systems that are, yes, moving towards being more open-minded and stuff, but all in all is not spiritual, right? And in terms of the modern interpretation for this Sabian symbol, it's the choice to carry our spiritual practice into the material world, even when it's uncomfortable for us, right? So the bones of reality, right? Saturn's energy is, the container, the structure, the routine that we need to build our spiritual life on, the bones that let us stand upright when the ground is shaken, right? So Saturn, although, often it is seen as the cruel, harsh taskmaster of, popular astrology, Saturn is the thing ultimately that says if you want this to last, you have to build it properly. But we fear Saturn because often we fear getting outside of our comfort zones, right? And Saturn wants us to get outside of our comfort zone. Yes, you can be an astronaut, a musician, whatever you want to be, but you know, you have to do the hard work to get there. You sometimes have to have a plan A, B and C, right? You have to keep on going after life failures and realize that failure is, you know, the route to success. You know, if you want to hold the mystery, you need a vessel strong enough not to shatter. You need to build systems, routines that are strong, right? We need to firm up on our emotional, psychological and spiritual processing, not hiding our emotions, not hiding from the psychological and spiritual, but actually just learning some rules of life. One of the major rules is we can only be responsible for our own actions. We can only control our own actions. This can be hard, you know, because sometimes we do have influence over people for a matter of time, and we can say things like, oh, this person used to love me, why don't they love us now? Well, the real reason is we don't actually have control. It's the other person that chooses to love us and do things for us, and they can stop at any minute. So Saturn is all about timing. It's all about taking personal responsibility and accountability for ourselves, right? Saturn is not the enemy of joy, but the dimension, you know, the influence, the energy in which things actually grow. The garden needs seasons, the tree needs years. You need time to integrate what you've learned, you know, not just download it and move on. Yeah, we do get spiritual inspiration. I've been there myself. I get downloads of information, but the download is the start. We have to actually practically, you know, bring our visions, our flashes of genius, or whatever you want to call it, you know, dreams into reality by practically taking actions to meet them, right? So right now Saturn is in Pisces, the dreamer meeting the builder, and Saturn in Pisces asks us, can you build a structure, you know, a routine that holds your spirituality without crossing it? Can you create boundaries that protect your practice without cutting you off from the mystery? And the shadow, you know, what you've been avoiding is, you know, often we try to transcend, go beyond reality, be like, oh, this doesn't bother me, you know, I have to ignore this, you know. But ultimately, you know, Saturn's conjunction to Neptune is drawing our attention to the excuses that we've been making, you know, where we've been using Saturn as an excuse, such as, I can't do that, I'm too disciplined, I need more structured routine before I can start. Saturn's shadow is perfectionism as procrastination, rigidity, inflexibility disguised as responsibility, the refusal to begin because you haven't built the actual perfect routine, you know, container yet, or the opposite, you've been avoiding Saturn entirely. No structure, no routine, no discipline, no boundaries, just flow, just trust, just divine timing. And now you're realizing, without bones, without routine, the body collapsed. So ultimately, you know, we can avoid things by trying to have the perfect routine and having the perfect structure and saying, I need this to be like this before I can do that. I've fallen into that trap. Also falling into the trap, oh, I don't need no routine, I just go with the flow. And so we have to find balance, right? We've got Saturn that rules Capricorn, which is a cardinal earth sign, Neptune, Pisces, mutable, you know, water sign meeting. So we need to find the balance between the spiritual and the practical, right? And the gift of Saturn's conjunction to Neptune is what becomes possible, you know. Saturn offers us the blueprint, right, of life that can hold everything we are. Not a cage, a cathedral, space held by routine, mystery contained by form, practical actions having systems. The practices that actually work because you do them every day, not just when you feel inspired, right? So if you watch The Bear, I don't know if you do, but calming the bear, you know, learning that excellence isn't the enemy of healing. Sometimes the discipline of showing up, doing the work, building the thing properly, that is the healing, right? Not the shortcut, the long way. The medicine, what this transit offers is the ability for us to, build the right routine, the right space, the right containers, strong enough to hold that actual spiritual practice, not the Instagram or TikTok version, but, the routines that includes our rage, our doubt, our need for therapy, our, medication if you want anything, our human limitations, right? Saturn says you can be mystical and pay your bills, spiritual and set boundaries, devoted to practice and still need professional help, right? So Saturn's conjunction to Neptune is bringing the dissolution, the ending of illusion of the fantasy, right? So Neptune energy, well, as we know, Neptune is the ocean, the boundless, the unknown, the thing that dissolves all boundaries, structure and routines, and all separation between us and them, seeing that all of us as a human family are all interconnected despite our religion, sexuality, skin tones and any other factor that makes us different from each other, right? But at the core, we are all children of the higher power, God, whoever we want to call that spiritual presence, the higher consciousness. So where Saturn holds the walls, Neptune reminds you the walls are open to flow, the permeable, letting things through, right? Where Saturn says this is real, Neptune whispers, but so is this, and this, and this. Neptune is not the enemy. Neptune is your access to the numerous, the mysterious, the transcendent. Neptune is why you can feel God, a higher power, consciousness in music, why you cry at sunsets, why there's more to this life on earth than what we've told, to believe in, and anything else that we can see and measure, right? But Neptune in shadow, as I said, is the fantasy you mistake for faith, the spiritual bypassing you call surrender, the disassociation you label as high vibing, right? The escape you rebrand as enlightenment. Neptune is at home in Pisces, the mystic in her element, and Neptune in Pisces asks us, can you access the mystery without abandoning reality? Can you be spiritual without using it to avoid being human? The shadow, what you've been avoiding in terms of, the Neptune energy, is that, it's calling our attention to where we've been using Neptune energy, whether it's Netflix and chilling, drugs or alcohol, whatever, toxic relationships, to escape reality, not to transcend, but to avoid reality, to avoid our problems. The meditation that we may have been doing, can be actual dissociation. So just paying attention to your spiritual practice, whether it be meditation or whatever, Tai Chi, yoga. And we can do these things, but are we doing other things as well? Or are we just focusing on one element of our life? So, Neptune is reminding us that the high vibe only philosophy is actually emotional, spiritual, psychological bypassing, the manifesting practice that lets you avoid taking material action, the fantasy of the perfect partner, the perfect career, the perfect life that keeps you from building the actual one. And Neptune's shadow is the lie that spirituality means you won't have to deal with the hard parts of being human, that if you just get conscious enough, you will transcend money problems, relationship problems, health problems, and the weight of having a body, The gift comes, and when we start working correctly with Neptune energy, what becomes possible is that, Neptune energy offers us access to something larger than our individual suffering. It gives us a connection to the whole. Like I said despite our differences, we start to see that one and all is the same, like that we're all the same at our core, and we give compassion to others and ourselves. It gives us the ability to sense what cannot be measured but is still absolutely real. It gives us creativity, intuition and inner knowing. Bob Marley sang about emancipating ourselves, freeing ourselves from mental slavery, and that's Neptune's gift, right? Not escaping reality, but freeing ourselves from the prison of thinking that the material reality is all there is. And also, if you're empathetic, the falsehood and not giving compassion to yourself, and if you think you're above and you transcended everything, right? The reality of we've all got shadow, and we can see that when we walk under the moonlight, right? And there's our shadow in the moonlight. So we've all got, I don't want to call them weaknesses, but we've all got parts of ourselves that are not perfect, right? And that's okay, because sometimes when we go into a spiritual practice, we can be like, oh, they're vibing there and I'm vibing so high, and I've transcended all of this, right? So the medicine, what Neptune offers, Neptune's energy, right, in Saturn's conjunction to Neptune, is the ability to bring our spirituality down into our body, into our relationships, into our bank account. Can your practice include your medication? Can your mysticism include your therapist, as I said earlier? Can you be devoted to something larger than yourself and still set boundaries with people who harm you? Neptune meeting, conjuncting Saturn asks, can the infinite live in the finite, right? Can the spiritual live in the material? Can mystery be embodied and lived? Not as theory, but actually. And this is what this energy of Saturn conjunct Neptune wants us to do, right? So now I'm going to talk about, the core work of, the structure and routine of Saturn meeting the flow, the unknown, the sea of Neptune. So when Saturn and Neptune meet at the same degree, we're not getting two separate energies having a conversation. We're getting a complete merging, the builder and the dissolver becoming one thing entirely. Imagine building a foundation on the ocean floor, not on the beach but in the water. The structure, the routine, the floor must hold the water whilst the waves move through it. That's this transit, right? You're being asked to create something solid enough to last, but flexible enough not to shatter when reality changes, right? So the lies that you've been living, such as spirituality means transcending your human limitations, rising above, getting so conscious you won't need therapy, medication, boundaries, money management, or difficult conversations, or any other lie you've been telling yourself, but these are the main ones, right? So, becoming so high vibe that material reality can't touch you. And I myself have fallen into this trap, so I'm having a hard time. Not a hard time, but, smiling at my face, because, this for many, many years was my focus, to transcend, to get into this beautiful relationship where we've both transcended reality and we can just live in this kind of bliss, or just stay single and be in this bliss, right? But ultimately life will always be life in, so the best that we can do, we form connections. People leave, people come, bills stay, situations change, right? So life is always life in, so the best we can do is learn how to handle real life, Yes, if we're going to just go into the mountains and live on our own and not interact with anyone, then sure, we can transcend everything. But from when we're going to interact in the real world, we need to know. And the truth that this transit reveals is that it's about integration, integrating the spiritual and, the earthly, the heartbreaks with the transcendence. And oh my God, this is so beautiful moments, not transcendence, but integration. So spirituality that includes your body, mysticism that pays the bills, compassion that doesn't bypass your need for boundaries. The infinite is embodied within us, we live the infinite. We don't try to, transcend the finite by living in the infinite. We're infinite in the finite, right? So like a tree with roots deep in the water, you're learning to be grounded in what flows, right? So in terms of where this energy lands in your life specifically, and I am going to give guidance for all 12 sun, moon and rising signs later on, but in terms of our personal development, we're being asked to start performing healed and start actually healing. The spiritual identity you've created, in real life or on social media, it's not holding. The work now is to build a practice that serves your actual life, not your ideal one. So in terms of your spiritual practice, your meditation needs to include your rage. Your manifestation work needs to include taking, material practical action. Can you be devoted to mystery and still show up for therapy? Can you still trust the process and also build the structure, routine that's needed to, go with the trust in the process? So in terms of relationships, this transit exposes where you've been spiritually bypassing conflict. So instead of we all can be guilty of this, like we never fight, when it's actually we never communicate properly. Can you be spiritual partners and still need couples therapy? If you're self-partnered, the relationship with yourself is the one you're in 24/7. Can you give yourself what you've been waiting for someone else to provide? Can you be your own partner, not just tolerating your own company, but building a life you don't need to escape from, And as I said, I'm going to deep dive into all things relationships later, but for now, just notice, where are you using spirituality to avoid being human? Where are you transcending when you need to be integrating? Where's the structure, routine that has been built on fantasy instead of, a bedrock, nothing but ashes, and when we pick up ashes, right, what do they do? They dissolve. So we have to get real about our routines, right? So now I'm going to talk a bit about the wound that's being exposed. So as I said, the primary lie that's being exposed now is that I need to transcend, rise above, go beyond my human experience, and this protects, our discomfort with embodiment with life, right? We can just say we need to rise above it, so we can't admit that we're comfortable. And Saturn conjunct Neptune wants us to get real about our fear of being too human, too messy, too needy, too angry, too limited, and the terror that your spiritual practice won't save you from having to deal with your body, your bills, your unhealed trauma, the hard work of actually building a life. So this manifests as, using meditation to dissociate, not to integrate, as I said, using high vibe only to bypass grief, heartbreak, rage and fear, and using manifestation as an excuse not to take any practical action, believing that if you just get conscious enough, healed enough, spiritual enough, you'll transcend the need for therapy, medication, boundaries and difficult conversations, thinking that enlightenment means not needing anyone, independence as spiritual achievement, being so whole you don't require human connection, support or community. And Saturn conjunct Neptune is reminding you, if you're doing all of that you're not transcending, you're dissociating. You'll wait for divine timing instead of building the thing is actually wasting time. Trusting the universe whilst your bank account empties, rising your vibration whilst your relationships crumble. You think spirituality is the escape route from being human, and remember that spirituality is meant to enhance our human experience, and we are here to not, kind of languish in our suffering. That's not what it's all about, but realizing that spirituality is about being able to cope with life when it's life in, not avoid it, right? So as I said, integration, not transcendence, spirituality that includes your body, not escapes it, mysticism that pays the rent, compassion that doesn't bypass your need for boundaries. You don't heal by rising above your humanity, you heal by bringing your spirituality down into it. So you ask yourself, can your practice include your medication? Can your devotion include your therapist? Can you access the infinite beginner and still need professional help? Can you be mystical and angry and in therapy and on a payment plan, So the secondary lie that we can tell ourselves is, if I'm spiritual enough, bad things won't happen to me. And this protects our fear of vulnerability, the illusion of control, the belief that consciousness is armor, it's our protection, right? If we just raise our vibration, if we meditate enough, manifest enough, raise our vibration enough, that we'll be immune to loss, pain, injustice, and the randomness of being alive. So this manifests as toxic positivity, spiritual bypassing, victim blaming, including, blaming yourself. When something difficult happens, you ask, what did I manifest, instead of what support do I need? You think suffering means you failed spiritually, that pain is punishment for not being conscious enough. The truth beneath this all is spirituality doesn't grant us immunity to life, it grants us tools for life, right? And that's what Saturn conjunction to Neptune is teaching us, because this is the planet of structure, routine, discipline. That's the tool. Saturn is the tools in the chart, instead of it being feared, because we all can fear Saturn, right? But Saturn grants us the tools, gives us the tools, and reminds us that practice doesn't prevent pain. Spirituality, religion, whatever, doesn't prevent pain. It gives you the ability to be with it, to feel it without being destroyed by it, to grieve without spiritually bypassing it, to raise without pretending it's low vibe. This transit asks, can you be spiritual and sacred, devoted and doubting, connected to something larger and still need human support? Can the structure, routine, hold the mystery without either one destroying the other, So that's the question to ask. So now I'm going to talk more about how the energies interact in terms of the aspects that I mentioned earlier and how they influence this conjunction, right? So let's talk about the conjunction itself astrologically. So, its maximum impact on the 20th of February. When planets conjunct at an exact degree, they don't just touch, they merge completely. This isn't Saturn influencing Neptune, this is Saturn becoming Neptune, Neptune becoming Saturn. And when this happens, a new thing emerges that is neither one nor the other, right? So it's neither Saturn nor Neptune, but they're both are each other at the same time. So think of it like mixing water and earth. You don't get wet dirt and soggy soil sitting next to each other, you get mud. Entirely new substance with properties neither element has alone, right? So mud can hold shape, so that's Saturn, and flow, it can touch it, right, the mud, and play with it or whatever, and that flow, the movement, is Neptune. It can be molded, formed, structured, but only if you work with its fluidity, only if we allow our fingers to move through the mud, or pottery, clay, whatever. So Saturn brings the structure, routine, discipline, boundaries, time, restriction, limitation, strategic planning, material reality, practical, real life, things happening, someone leaving, someone dying, all of life's crap, right? The bones of things, what lasts, what's actually true when you strip away the fantasy. Neptune brings the endings, the dissolutions, the transcendence, the compassion, the infinite, the mystery, the spirituality. What cannot be measured but is still real. The ocean that dissolves all boundaries. The fusion that creates grounded mysticism, right? So Saturn conjunct Neptune is saying, as I said, discipline needs to be part of our spiritual practice, right? Structure and routine needs to serve the mystery instead of containing it, right? Boundaries need to protect our practice without crushing our inspiration. The cathedral that I mentioned earlier, the form, whether it's a temple, wherever you go, whatever imagery you want to see, so the structure, your space, your spiritual space, your life space that holds the sacred, right? But what makes this difficult is that these energies are fundamentally opposed, right? Saturn says this is real, this is solid, this is what you can rely on. Neptune says nothing is solid, everything is permeable, open to flow and change, and can let things through. Reality itself is negotiable. Saturn builds walls, Neptune dissolves them. Saturn demands you face material reality. Neptune offers us escape from it, whether it's spirituality, drugs, alcohol, Netflix and chilling, whatever we do, right? And at this conjunction, as I said, we can't have one or the other. We can't spiritually bypass our way out of this, which is Neptune's shadow, right? And you can't, rigid structure, routine your way through it, like, keep the emotions in, feel nothing, all of that, transcend it, hold it in, forget about it, because that's Saturn's shadow. So Saturn's conjunction to Neptune is reminding us that the work is holding both simultaneously. This is why some of you feel you're losing your mind, the old mind, the one that could either transcend or, hold that structure and routine, or the mind that could escape or endure, keep on going, bottle things up, and that mind doesn't work with this energy anymore. We need a new mind, one that can be mystical and grounded, infinite and boundaried, devoted to the mystery and paying the bills on time. So the next aspect that's influencing this conjunction of Saturn and Neptune is the quintal, the birth making to Juno. And this is at 0.03 applying, and the quintal is a creative aspect, and it means that planets are 72 degrees apart. 7 and 2 equals 9 in numerology. So it's about endings, being innovations, being beginnings, artistry, unique expression, creative design. So it's an active energy. Juno rules commitment, contracts, partnerships, agreements, what you promise and what you demand in return. And when Saturn and Neptune are making a quintal to Juno, your entire understanding of commitment is being creatively, restructured, routinized. So the old contract that you had, such as I commit to you if you make me feel safe, spiritual, seen, understood, healed, is being questioned. And this aspect, the quintal with Saturn and Neptune, is wanting you to upgrade it to a new contract that says, I commit to building something real, even when it's uncomfortable, even when the fantasy dissolves, even when you can't be everything I imagined. For partnerships, the question to ask is, can you commit to the actual person, not the spiritual ideal? Can the relationship be sacred and require couples therapy? Can you be soulmates and still need professional mediation, and if you're self-partnered, this aspect is asking you, can you commit to yourself the way you've been waiting for a partner to commit to you? Can you be faithful to your own healing, your own boundaries, your own life, not as a second choice, but as a primary devotion? The next aspect is Saturn and Neptune making a semi-square to the midheaven. So this is our career, right? So the semi-square is a minor friction, 45 degrees of irritation. Think of it as an itch that you scratch but it don't go away. And it's separating at 10 degrees up. And, as I said, it's the thing that needles you, the low-grade tension. You can't resolved, quiet, it's just there. And the midheaven represents your public life, career, reputation, how you are seen in the world and what you have been building towards, right, professionally. So this aspect creates friction between your spiritual practice and your public life. The meditation, retreat doesn't pay the mortgage. The Instagram spirituality doesn't build actual career stability. The trust the universe approach isn't creating sustainable long-term income. So you're being asked, can your spiritual practice support your material ambitions, or have you been using spirituality to avoid building an actual career, right? So can you be mystical and strategic, devoted to practice and networking, trusting and also sending invoices on time? The irritation is the teacher here. Every time you feel the rub between what I believe and what actually works professionally, that's where the integration lives, right? So now we've got some background supporting aspects, right, that have a moderate influence, but influence all the same. So we've got the ongoing, Neptune and Pluto sextile, and we've got Saturn and Neptune both in conjunction, so that means Saturn and Neptune are both sextile in Pluto at the time of this transiting aspect, right? So the sextile offers opportunity, 60 degrees of potential, possibility, what becomes available if you reach for it, right? So this is sextile of nice easy energy, but we have to work with it. It isn't automatic. This is support for your hard work, for your efforts, right? So Pluto rules transformation, death, rebirth, power, shadow, the underworld, what gets destroyed so something new can emerge, be born, be created. And when Saturn and Neptune sextile Pluto, deep transformation becomes possible if you're actually willing to start or continue and do the actual work. The sextile won't force it, but it supports it. So if you're willing to let your old spiritual identity die, if you're willing to face the shadow of your practice, if you're willing to admit where you've been using transcendence to avoid transformation, Pluto offers the power to rebuild from the bedrock. Nothing but the ashes, right, to rebuild. And this is the composting aspect where you let go. Some of you may burn your whole house down, just like, I'm done, I'm through, I'm cutting all ties, I'm starting something new, right? And if you do this, what you thought was dead, your old spiritual practice that weren't working can become, fertilizer, the compost for what you actually want to keep alive, right? But you have to be willing to get your hands dirty and do the shadow work and be honest about what needs to change, right? And then we've got Saturn and Neptune making a trine to the black moon, Lilith, right? So this is subtle background influence, right? And we've got, the series of, we had the thinking, the solar eclipse just before this, and then we're going to have the lunar eclipse on the 3rd of March, and Lilith is instrumental in both of those. So Saturn and Neptune trining Lilith, right, at the time of this Saturn-Neptune conjunction, which is kind of influencing this whole solar lunar eclipse period, right, gives us 120 degrees of natural harmony, grace, and what works without effort, trying to flow easily. And with a 6.11 orb, it is a wild, connection. It's a background whisper, not foreground kind of demand, but still Black Moon Lilith represents what you have exiled, given up, the world feminine, the world masculine, the rage that won't be tamed, sexuality that won't be sanctified and repressed, the parts of you that don't fit the spiritual identity. This is what Lilith represents, right? And this trine shows and suggests your shadow work can support your spiritual change, restructuring, right? The rage you've been calling low vibe, that's motivation, that's your feel. The sexuality you've tried to transcend, that's power. The wide parts of you that you have excelled to be more spiritual and hidden them away, they're ready to come back home in a new way, because these habits that we may have with race, sexuality are not bad. They're only bad or disruptive if we let them overrule our life. I believe everything has its time and place and space, right? And we've all got different limits, but that don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that you should do excessive drugs or alcohol, but on the other hand, I'm not the karma police as well. So because at this orb, this energy is gentle, it's a suggestion, not a demand, but if you listen, it supports you. If you ignore it, it waits, sort of thing. So it's up to you what you want to do with this trine with, Lilith and Saturn and Neptune, but ultimately it's asking you to find new ways to express the parts of you that you've locked away, right? So now I'm going to talk about the patterns, the transiting patterns that are happening. So as I said, this transit doesn't happen in isolation. They are 4 T-squares, a false hammer and 2 stelliums that are all active at the same time. So this is why it can feel like everything is happening at once, especially if you've got a lot of Saturn 12th house, Neptune 10th house, Capricorn, Aquarius placements in your chart, even Leo as well, and Virgo. So anyway, and 6th house as well, and 5th house and 11th house energy and aspects in your natal chart. So the first T-square between the Sun in Aquarius, Uranus in Taurus and the Ascendant in Leo at 23% intensity, it creates a crisis of identity versus rebellion versus self-presentation, right? This is what's happening right there. And a T-square involves 2 oppositions forming squares to the apex planet, right? That's what a T-square is. So the Sun in Aquarius wants revolutionary change, future-focused thinking, breaking from tradition, and the Ascendant in Leo wants to be seen, recognised, celebrated for who you are now, and Uranus in Taurus creates the pressure point, bringing like sudden chaos, disruption to stability, and breakthroughs can masquerade as a breakdown. You know, you can feel on edge and emotionally, psychologically and spiritually drained right now. This T-square is demanding that you change yourself and your self-concept without losing your core identity. Also, you know, it's asking, can you be radically yourself whilst also being part of something larger? And that's part of the eclipse patterns, which is calling us to, yes, be individuals, but, you know, remember that we're part of a bigger ecosystem of not only higher consciousness, but life here on Earth, right? And, you know, this Saturn conjunction to Neptune is getting us to get real with our higher consciousness, spiritual practices. So yeah, going back to the T-square, the Leo rising wants us to sign individually. The Aquarius sun wants us to serve the collective. Uranus says you can't have one without destroying the other unless you find a entirely new way. So where this lands with Saturn and Neptune conjuncting, right, is that your spiritual identity, Neptune, right, needs material change, practical change, restructuring, that's Saturn, and it needs to be authentic, and that's Leo rising, and it needs to serve something beyond your individual enlightenment and pleasure, which is Aquarius, right? So the pressure is, can you practice your spiritual, you know, life at the same time of your, you know, personal life, paying the bills and all of that, and be revolutionary and grounded in reality at the same time. So the T-square number 2 between Mars in Capricorn, that is, Uranus in Taurus, of course, and Leo ascendant, right? So this creates action versus resistance versus sudden disruption, right? So adding to the chaos. Mars in Capricorn wants discipline, and remember Saturn rules Capricorn, right? So it wants strategic long-term action, discipline of course, and the Ascendant in Leo wants immediate expression and gratification, meeting your pleasure needs now, right? Creative fire, being seen whilst acting, and Uranus in Taurus disrupts both of these energy, you know, the ground shifts, you know, it changes just as you commit to the plan. So this T-square wants you to take action, but don't expect ground to stay solid, so plan for change, right? So thinking about how you can stay solid by building that core within while the world around you change, right? Building structure and routine that you know might crack tomorrow, and then when that routine cracks, you know, building a new one, right? So this is action without certainty, a strategy that includes, you know, improvisation, thinking on your feet, being flexible, right? And discipline that doesn't, you know, become sort of like brittle and rigid, and, you know, discipline that allows for change. This is what needs to happen. So, you know, with Saturn's conjunction to Neptune, you can't wait for perfect conditions, which is Mars in Capricorn energy, you know, wanting solid ground. You can't, you know, spiritually bypass taking action, which is Neptune shadow, right? You have to build the structure and routine, which is Saturn, whilst the ocean moves beneath it, which is Neptune energy. Taking the action with Mars, whilst the Earth changes, which is Uranus energy, and doing it in public, which is Leo rising, right? The practice is move anyway, even though things are changing, right? So the third T-square between Juno, the Moon, and Jupiter and retrograde, right? So this creates commitment versus growth versus emotional need. So Juno in Sagittarius wants freedom within commitment, adventure within partnership, the promise that doesn't cage, and hold us in. And Jupiter retrograde in Gemini wants us to rethink everything, question every belief, grow through revision, not addition, right? And the Moon in Pisces is overwhelmed, dissolving, needing emotional sanctuary. And Neptune rules Pisces, right? So this demands us and asks us, can you commit without sacrificing growth? Can you expand, grow without abandoning what you've built? Can you honour yourself emotionally, psychologically and spiritually, whilst also questioning whether these needs are serving you, right? And in terms of, its influence on Saturn and Neptune, right, conjuncting, commitment, Juno, right, needs to change, which is represented by Saturn. It needs to restructure. You need to change what you think about commitment, because your beliefs about partnership, represented by Jupiter, are being revised. Jupiter being in retrograde in Gemini, and your emotional world, the Moon in Pisces, is also dissolving into something you don't recognise, which is Neptune energy at play, right? So the question is, can you stay whilst everything changes? Can you commit to the process of not knowing, right, to the uncertainty? And us humans can struggle with this because we love our comfort zone and knowing what's going to happen, right? And this is where we get stuck. So the fourth and final T-square between the South Node in Leo, Lilith in Scorpio, and the Sun and Pallas in Aquarius, right, brings the spotlight on past patterns versus future vision versus our exiled rage or our hidden rage, right? So the South Node in Leo is where you've been, the identity built on being special, being seen, the chosen one, and the Sun and Pallas in Aquarius is where you're going, collective service, strategic revolution, thinking for the whole. And Lilith in Scorpio is what you have hidden, exiled, to maintain the spiritual image of rage, sexuality, power the world. So the demand is, let the old identity die, which is the South Node, step into revolutionary service, which is Aquarius, and bring the shadow with you, which is Lilith. You can't be a peaceful spiritual teacher if you're still performing healed instead of actually healing. And where this lands with, the Saturn and Neptune conjunction, is that the spiritual identity, Neptune, that you've built, Saturn, was constructed on exiled energy. You exiled your race to be high vibe, you exiled your power to be humble, you exiled your sexuality to be pure. And this T-squares is saying whatever it was, because not everybody exiled their power to be humble, but whatever it is you hidden, this T-square says bring it all back. The structure, routine that includes your shadow is the one that will last in the long run, right? So we've got a force hammer between the South Node in Leo, Lilith in Scorpio, and Chiron and Ceres in Pisces, right? So this is two sexty squares. This is how force hammers are created, and the aspect of the stubborn, unresolved tension pointing to the apex, right? So this creates pressure. The force hammer is the pattern that won't let you avoid the work. It hammers the apex until something breaks or transforms, and the apex of this force hammer is Chiron and Ceres in Pisces. So our deepest wound, Chiron, and our need for nurturing and care and love, Ceres, being dissolved into Neptunian waters, right? So the pressure comes from the South Node in Leo, which is our old identity built on being special, and Lilith in Scorpio, which is our exhaled, raised and power. So these two forces are hammering your wound, demanding you finally confront what you've been spiritually bypassing, and it demands us to start performing being healed. The spiritual identity, which is represented by the South Node in Leo, was built on what we hidden, what we exiled, right, Lilith, and now the wound Chiron is demanding actual care and tending, not transcendence, but to look after it, to live with it, to respect it. So this Force Hammer is asking, can you nurture yourself, represented by Keris energy, through the healing, not just wait for someone else to do it? And in terms of how it really influences this conjunction, the wound, Chiron in Pisces, meets the structure, and routine of Saturn, and we can't dissolve it away, we can't just hide it, Neptune's shadow of, indulging in drugs, alcohol excessively. We can't meditate it into submission or Tai Chi or yoga or any other spiritual practice. We have to face it. We have to build practices that actually look after it. Therapy, medication if need be. As I said at the beginning, can you be holy and sometimes realize that you may need medication? You need a joint effect of, looking after our physical body and healing it, right? Doing that body work, respecting our boundaries. Forge Hammer says, do the work actually, don't just pretend to do it, right? So we've got 2 3-point stelliums with the Sun Palace North Node and Venus Palace North Node in Aquarius. So stelliums create concentrated focus energy when 3 or more planets are in the same sign or within the same degree orb range, right? That area of our life becomes hyper activated. So Aquarius is future focused, revolutionary, collective minded, emotionally detached, intellectually brilliant and genius and socially progressive energy that wants us to give up conforming, right? So the message is the future is calling, not the fantasy future where everything is perfect, the actual future where you're building something that serves the collective using strategy represented by Palace, with your core identity represented by the Sun, and your values, which is represented by Venus, right, aligned with your soul's direction, which is the North Node. And where this lands with Saturn making a conjunction to Neptune, it's reminding us that we can't build a future Aquarius on spiritual fantasy, which is Neptune's shadow, right? You have to build a structure, routine around it. Saturn, needs us to make actual plans, actual strategy, actual material reality. Can we practice all right theory rising? I've been there, but these things work in practice, right? So this stellium says the revolutionary is and needs to be practical. The future is built but not manifested. The collective work requires you to commit to yourself, not just, good vibes. You have to commit to your shadow as well, right? And even as I record this, part of me is like the good parts, like, shadow, commit to it, no, we must eradicate. So I know that it's hard because we all want to be as good as we can be, and typically, for the most part, that's what most people want, or at least appear to be seen as being good and respectable or whatever in society. But as I said, it's about learning new ways to express your shadow rather than letting it destroy you or destroy others, right? So now I'm just going to talk a bit about the timeline of this energy and how we can integrate it. So as I said earlier, on the 20th of February is when it's exact. Between the 19th and 21st of February, there's that conjunction, this is maximum impact. This is when the fantasy dissolves, changes, whether we're ready or not. So clear your calendar sort of thing. Don't make any major decisions. Try and feel everything and try not to numb yourself, because we've got Neptune 12th house wanting us to hide and escape, right? The full influence of this conjunction is from February the 10th. We're going to feel it peaking up until the 1st of March. This is the build up and release phase. You'll feel this coming before there's that day, and the aftershocks can continue for weeks, if not months, for some of you, especially if you've got a lot of 12th house, 6th house, Saturn, Neptune, Capricorn, 10th house, 11th and 5th house energy in your chart. But from, the 10th of February to the 1st of March, this is the active work period, right? And then from the 1st of February to the 10th of March, this is the background effect. So the entire month is under this transit influence, right? Some of you may have been feeling it since late January 26th, and the integration can continue through mid-March, right, up until, you know, the end of the year. It just depends of the repercussions of the things you're going to change, right? So the integration phase is the build-up, right? Phase 1, Feb the 1st to the 18th. This is when your spiritual performance can begin to show cracks. You notice the bypassing, the fantasy becomes harder to maintain and hide. Use this time to prepare. Therapy appointments, schedule support systems, identify them. Clear your calendar for peak days. Phase 2 is February the 19th to the 21st. This is the peak, this is the fusion, the combining, the dissolution, the letting go, the death of the old spiritual identity. Don't try to control this, let it happen. Your job is to witness, feel, survive, not to fix. And phase 3 is from the 22nd of February to the 10th of March. So this is integration, integrating the new structure, routine start to emerge, be born and be created. And they're not fully formed yet, they're just beginning, and this is where you build. So you know, you may seek out therapy, continue therapy, look at your boundaries, enforce them, change them, create them, actually change the spiritual practices and your day-to-day habits to things that actually work for you on the mind, body and soul levels, and take practical action to bring this change in, right? So from March to April onwards, this is the embodiment, the living it phase. The work continues, the exact transit is over, but the integration is lifelong. And remember, Saturn's conjunction to Neptune is asking, can you live what you've learned, build what you've discovered, and embody, you know, live the truth instead of performing, living the truth, right? So now I'm going to talk about the Sabian symbols that are influencing this conjunction, giving us some somatic body wisdom, right? So each Sabian degree corresponds to a specific part of the body, and these are metaphors, these are maps, you know, showing us where our body is holding this transit, right? So as I said, Saturn and Neptune are both in the 7 degrees of Pisces, which has the image of a cross lying on the rocks. It rules the right talus, ankle bone in the human body. So a cross is a symbol of burden, sacrifice, spiritual responsibility, resting on rocks, not planted in the earth, not held upright, but lying down on the stone. So traditionally, this is the way of spiritual duty, meeting the harsh, inflexible reality of life. The cross represents what you carry for others, God, the higher power, consciousness, for the cause, for your religion, for your beliefs, whatever. The rock represents the material world that doesn't care about your devotion. So in terms of the modern psychological interpretation, you have been carrying a spiritual identity like a cross, heavy, visible, proof of your dedication, but now it's lying on the rocks, meaning the foundation isn't soil, it's stone, it won't grow, it won't give. The question is, will you keep carrying what no longer serves, or will you lay it down, will you put it down? So the shadow of this symbol is, you know, martyrdom. They believe that spiritual growth requires suffering, that if it's not hard, it's not real, using the weight of practice as the proof of worthiness, right? So the light of this symbology is the willingness to put down what you thought you had to carry, which is often other people's you know, expectations and things like that, you know, or, you know, their judgments of others. This person thinks I'm wrong, the way I live my life is wrong, so I have to carry that, right? To recognize that some of the burdens were never yours, or maybe all of them, right? And that spiritual practice can be grounded without being crushing. So as I said, it rules the right talus, which is the ankle bone in our human body, and it bears the entire body weight whilst allowing motion. It connects the leg to the foot, it holds it upright and lets you move. And the right side rules action, moving forward, what you do in the world, right? So when the right talus is active, activated. You know, it's reminding us to check our foundation. Are you trying to move forward while standing on stone? Are you putting weight on what you can't hold? So the somatic practice to do is to stand barefoot, feel your ankles, notice if you're gripping, holding tension, or trying to control the ground beneath you. Can you let your weight drop through your bones without collapsing? Can you be held by the earth instead of holding yourself rigid and to inflexible standards, right? The work is to receive support, don't just perform, right? And then we've got Pluto in the 11th degree of Capricorn, and this is the image is pheasants, birds, right, displaying their brilliant colours on a vast lawn, and this rules the left cerclite ligaments, right? So again, you know, we've been drawn to the image of pheasants, birds known for vibrant colours, are showing off on a manicured lawn, displaying their beauty performance, but also the lawn is big, it's vast, right? The stage is huge and you're small. So traditionally, the peacocking of achievement, showing your colours, showing your status, showing your wealth and all of that, your accomplishments. So the lawn represents cultivated space, you know, wealth, privileged access. So you're being asked to show yourself fully, colours and all, you know, warts and all, your weaknesses and your strengths. But the question is, are you performing for approval or expressing authentically? The pheasant doesn't choose its colours, they're inherent, but the display, that's choice. So the shadow here is performance replacing presence, using accomplishment as proof of worth. They believe that if you're brilliant enough, visible enough, impressive enough, you will finally be safe. So the light of this is authentic expression without apology, showing your gifts not for approval but because they're yours to share. The understanding that the vastness, the bigness, largeness of the lawn doesn't diminish your colour. So just because there's lots of people in the world, that doesn't mean that there aren't people out there. Like I said, I believe everyone's got their niche, you know, even doing what I'm doing. There's certain people that won't listen to me, they want to listen to someone else, and that's just the way it is, right? So we've all got our audience, so to speak. So this rules the left cerclate ligaments in the knee. So these are the ligaments that stabilise the knee, preventing it from hyperextending or collapsing. They allow movement whilst maintaining structure and routine. The left side rules receptivity, the feminine, what you receive from the world. The left cerclate ligaments are activated. Check your stability in receiving. Do you collapse when someone sees you? Do you look up when someone offers support? Can you be stable and flexible when power comes towards you, right? So in terms of the somatic practice, you know, slightly bend your knees, notice if you lock them, which is a sign of you being inflexible, and let them buckle, which is a sign of collapse. So practice the middle, being engaged but not too rigid and inflexible, receptive but not, you know, being able to fall and collapse easily. And this is a metaphor for life, you know, gotta be flexible enough but firm enough to weather the storms and protect our boundaries. So the ligaments work is hold and yield, you know, giving structure and routine and flow when need to be, you know, yielding, giving in, making room, being open when needed. So Juno is in the 25th degree of Sagittarius. So this is the imagery of a chubby boy and a hobby horse, and this rules the condyles of the right femur. So this is the image of a fat happy child playing with a toy horse, not riding the real horse, pretending, you know, using imagination as practice, play as preparation. So traditionally this is the rehearsal before the real thing, trying on adult roles in child's play. The hobby horse isn't real but the joy is. So we're practicing commitment without the weight of consequence yet. The hobby horse lets us feel what it's like to ride without the danger of falling, but at some point you have to get on the actual horse, right? You know, it's just a pretend horse, it's a play horse what children have, right? That's what a hobby horse is. And one day you may want to get into an actual physical animal horse, right? So the shadow, it's pointing us towards staying in rehearsal mode and performing commitment without actually committing commit into anything, right? The spiritual practice that never becomes embodied and lived, the relationship you talk about instead of building. The light of this energy of the chubby kid on the horse, right, is honouring the practice phase, knowing that imagination precedes manifestation, that you need to feel it in your body, even pretend before you can build it in reality. The body part, you know, the hip joint, the condyles of the right femur, the rounded ends of the thigh bone that connect to the hip and knee bone, right, they allow the full range of motion that makes walking, running and riding possible. The right femur rules forward motion, taking action, moving towards what you want. So when the condyles are activated, check your range of motion. Are you stuck in one position? This is representative of rigid commitment or refusing to land anyway. So this is representative of, you know, perpetual exploration, which is represented by Sagittarius energy, where Juno is, right? So can you move, make progress and commit? Can you explore and commit, right? That's what this Juno here is putting us towards, and Saturn and Neptune conjunction is wanting us to be in the flow but disciplined in the flow, right? So in terms of the somatic practice, hip circles that are wide and slow, full range, and notice where you resist, where you hold. The condyles need full rotation to function, so does commitment, right? You can't ride a horse if your hips are locked, right? Okay, so the midhaven is in the 22nd degree of Aries, which has the Sabian symbology of the gate to the garden of desire, and this rules the cheek muscles, right, in the human body. So a gate, and not the garden itself, the entrance, what you pass through to access what you want, right, is what this Sabian symbol gives us the image of. So traditionally, this is the threshold, the meeting point between wanting and having, the choice point. The gate can open or stay closed, but you have to approach it. Your desires aren't shameful. The garden exists, but there's a gate. So what this shows is that we need to cross the threshold. Yes, we can want it from the outside, the gate of forever, you know, never going through the gate, or we can walk straight through the gate, right? So the shadow is standing at the gate, fantasizing about the garden, never entering it, using I am, manifesting it to avoid the vulnerability of actually reaching for what you want, right? And the light of this is acknowledging desire without saying, understanding that the gate isn't punishment, it's protection. Not everything is meant for you, but what is, you have to walk through it to find out. So the body part, this Sabian rules the cheek muscles, right, are the muscles that allow us to smile, express emotion facially, show what you feel. So when our cheek muscles are activated, because Aries rules the head, right, you know, so yeah, so when the cheek muscles are activated, check your expression. Are you performing joy whilst grieving inside? Are you showing what you think people want to see instead of what's real? The gate to the garden of desire requests honest expression, not the performance of wanting, but the vulnerability of actually showing what you need. So the somatic practice is your face in the mirror, looking at it. Make the expression that matches how you actually feel, not how you think you should feel. Let your face tell the truth, your words won't, right? The cheeks, no, sort of thing. So yeah, this degree is just telling us to pay attention to our facial expressions, you know, the cheeks, no, letting our face tell the truth that we hide from ourselves, right? Not to wallow in the pain or anything like that, but to recognize it, to feel it, because this is what Saturn conjunct Neptune wants us to do, to feel our pain, right? Go with the flow, be open to all shades and hues of human experience, right? So Lilith is in the 13th degree of Scorpio, and this is the inventor inventing, and this was the vulva, labia, mammary glands in the human body. So the image is someone in the act of creation, not the finished invention, the process of inventing, the trial, the error, the breakthrough, the failure, the getting back up after the failures and trying again, right? So Traditionally, this points us to innovation, newness, through persistence, the creative force that doesn't stop when the first attempt fails. So, in terms of the modern psychological interpretation, you're inventing yourself, not discovering who you always were. That's a spiritual bypassing lie. You're inventing, creating something that didn't exist before through trial, error, and the refusal to quit, getting back up after each failure, right, that life throws at you. So the shadow of this energy is waiting for the perfect blueprint. And remember, Saturn conjunct Neptune is saying, we're in perfection now, basically, So the shadow of this is waiting for the perfect blueprint before you start, thinking you need to know who you are before you can build a life. The invention happens through the building, not before. So the light of this energy is, the permission to fail, to revise, to try again, understanding that creation is messy, it's not a straight line, it's non-linear, it requires getting your hands dirty, right? So the true inventor doesn't transcend, go beyond matter. The true inventor works with matter, with practical reality, with life failures, heartbreaks and temptations and all the rest of it. So the body part, the vulva, libra, mulnira, glans, penis, the parts of the body most associated with pleasure, sensation, vulnerability, creative life force, right? When these are activated, check your relationship to pleasure, power and creation. Have you spiritualized sex into something sacred that you can't actually enjoy? Have you transcended desire instead of embodying it? Lilith and Scorpio at this degree says your power isn't in rising above your body, it's in your body. The creative thoughts, the sexual, the artistic, the inventive isn't separate from your spirituality, it is your spirituality. So the somatic practices, pelvic floor engagement and release, not holding, not collapsing, the rhythm of contraction and expansion. This is the creative power, not transcendent, the embodied, the lived. The inventor works with matter, and so do you, right? So that's the end of the Sabian symbol analysis, and now I'm going to talk about the Nakshatra that Saturn and Neptune are in deeper context, deeper, more depth, whatever. So in Vedic astrology, remember these Sabian symbols, which is from Western, and Nakshatras from Vedic, and I fuse both these systems because this is just how I am, and I believe that they work intricately. So in Vedic astrology, each planet occupies not just a sign and a degree, but a nakshatra, a lunar mansion, a 13.20 degree of the sky, section of the sky with its own deity, ruling planet, and mythological story. So this is a subtle layer beneath the Western interpretation. So Saturn and Neptune are both in Uttra Pada, and I'm still practicing and learning to pronounce these, so bear with me, guys. And this is the serpent of the deep, right? They're both in Pada too, right? So Saturn rules this nakshatra, and the deities are Badayana, the serpent of the deep waters, the dragon that lives at the bottom of the ocean, and the symbol is the back legs of a funeral cart, so what carries the dead to transformation, and the motivation, the karma, the desire, but not the surface desire, is deep, transformative desire, the longing that initiates, starts spiritual death and rebirth. So in terms of the mythology, Aurobadada is the serpent that lives in the depths, not the surface waters, but the bottom of the water, right? And where the light doesn't reach, where the pleasure is immense, where most beings can't survive, right? And this serpent represents the Kundalini force that lies dormant at the base of the spine, the power that when awakened raises through the chakras and transforms consciousness. But the awakening isn't gentle, it's volcanic, it destroys what was to make space for what will be, right? And what this nakshatra brings to the transit is, with both Saturn and Neptune being here, right, means the entire conjunction is happening in the realm of deep transformation, not surface level spiritual renovation, but fundamental restructuring. So we have to change it all, right? Tearing everything down and building from the top, right? We're being taken to the bottom, where the serpent lives, where the precipice, what's actually real versus what you've been performing. And the funeral cot symbol tells you something has to die. The old spiritual identity, the spiritual, fantasy-based practice, the transcendence that was actually dissociation, like I said in the intro, right? And Saturn ruling this Nakshatra was occupying it, creates a double emphasis. The structure routine of Saturn is being built in the depths of Pada, not on the surface where everyone can see. So Neptune represents the ocean, right? It's the 12th house. It's the dark waters in one case. It can take us to the lowest low, addictive, substance abuse, and the highest height, spirituality, right? So in the dark waters where only you and the serpent know what's real, this is what it's telling us to let go and be honest with ourselves. We don't need to be honest with the outside world. We need to get real with ourselves and on what's working for us and what's not working for us, right? So part of 2 is ruled by Mercury, the messenger, the communicator, the trickster, and Mercury's in its post-shadow phase, gearing up, right, to go retrograde next week. So this adds a layer. You have to name what you find in the depths. You can't just feel it, you have to speak it, write it, communicate what you discover when you meet the serpent. This is why some of you are being called to teach what you have been learning, not because you've mastered it, because in part 2 the medicine is the communication of depth, bringing what you find in the ocean bottom into language others can understand, right? So many of you, Saturn conjunct Neptune, it's the teacher, right? It's the 10th house, it's the public, it's going public with your Neptune, with your spiritual practice, with your addictions, with your struggles, in a healthy way. And that doesn't mean like I just mean don't perform vulnerability, be vulnerable, right? Be truthful with others, and connect with your audience, connect with those. And for some of you it's just one other person, for some of you it's just yourself, and for others it's going into that healing work, and starting that podcast, starting that channel, whatever it is, right? Not being scared of whatever is out there and thinking, no, this person's doing that. Like I said, everyone's got their needs, everyone's got people that will only listen to them. And Pluto, the listening ear, is in Savannah Nakshatra, Pada 1, and the moon rules this planet, right? And the deity is Vishnu, the preserver, the one who maintains cosmic order, and the symbol is 3 footprints, the path walked before you, right? So the motivation is Afra, material prosperity, practical achievement, and worldly success, right? So the mythology is Savannah means to hear or to listen, and this Nakshatra rules the ability to receive wisdom, to hear what's being transmitted, to listen deeply rather than react immediately, right? So even though I said that Saturn conjunct Neptune wants us to change, right, we don't have to do it immediately, right? What we need to do is not cling to what was, but maintain what's essential whilst everything else is changing, right? So not completely throw the baby out with the bathwater, throw out the old, but change the old and let go of what we need to let go of, right? And the 3 footprints symbolise learning from those who've walked before you, ancestors, teachers, the wisdom already present. And what this Nakshatra brings to Pluto, because Pluto rules death, transformation, shadow power, and in Savannah, the transformative power is being guided by the ability to listen, not force, not push, but listen. And the set star aspect between Pluto and Saturn and Neptune creates this opportunity if you are willing to listen to what the depths are teaching, and not only the depths of the world but the depths of your own psychological, emotional and spiritual pain and lessons, right? So Pluto in Savannah says the transformation you need is already being whispered by your body, by your dreams, by the patterns that keep repeating. Are you listening? And the moon ruling this Nakshatra, whilst Pluto is in it, shows us that transformation is emotional, psychological and spiritual, not just intellectual, right? You can't just think your way through this. You have to feel what needs to die, what needs to be preserved, what needs to be reborn. So Pada 1 is ruled by Mars. This is the action, assertion, the warrior. This creates tension. Savannah wants to listen. Pada 1 wants to act. The medicine is listen then act, not react, respond. Many of you have been acting without listening, doing the healing work without hearing what your body actually needs, taking action to avoid the discomfort of receiving guidance. And Pluto in Savannah, Pada 1 says stop, listen, then move. So ultimately the Nakshatras together are revealing with Saturn and Neptune in Uttarabhadrapada, the serpent of the deep, and Pluto in Savannah, the listening ear. This creates a specific invitation to go to the depths, where they meet, see what lives there, the serpent, the power, the truth you've been avoiding. Let the old spiritual identity die. That's the funeral cot imagery, right? Build the new structure, routine in the dark waters where only reality survives. That is Saturn ruling us and asking us to bring that discipline. Communicate what you find. This is the Pada 2 Mercury, right? Don't just feel it privately, speak it, write it, teach it, and whilst you're in the depths, listen. That's Savannah, telling us that transformation isn't something you force, it's something you receive. And Pluto in Savannah says the power isn't in making it happen, it's hearing what wants to happen and acting in alignment. The serpent teaches in silence, Vishnu preserves through listening, and you, well, you're being asked to go deeply, to listen closely, to speak truthfully, and only act on what you've heard, and that's real. Not from your head, but from the bottom of the ocean, where the serpent waits, where the presser reveals what's actually true, right? So, yeah. So now I'm going to talk about where this lands, doing a deep dive into how it affects our personal development, friendships, relationships, and all of that, right? So, in terms of our personal development, this transit asks, who are you when no one is watching, when the spiritual performance ends, right? When you strip away the curated identity that you sold the world on social media and all of that, the carefully crafted healed persona, what remains? You're being asked to start performing growth and start actually growing. To stop Instagram spiritual and start doing the unglamorous work of therapy every week, medication that helps if it helps. Of course, there's natural medication you can use like vitamin D, magnesium, and Serbian ginseng that can reduce anxiety and stuff. So using the things that work for you. Boundaries that make you unpopular, saying no, admitting that you don't have it all figured out. The personal development isn't about adding more practices, more certificates, right? More, letters after your name and all of that, or more proof of how conscious you are. It's about subtraction. What spiritual identity can you let die? What performance can you stop? What can you admit you still need help with? This might mean going back to therapy, even though you thought you were done, trying medication even though you wanted to heal naturally, setting boundaries with the spiritual community that demands you stay small, admitting the meditation isn't working as well as you said it was. So in terms of your spiritual development, as I said, it's the practice that includes your humanity. This is what Saturn conjunct Neptune, Saturn, the planet of the earth, it was Capricorn, cardinal earth sign, meeting Neptune, mutable water, saying us, to bring discipline to the water to get real. Our spiritual practice is being restructured from the ground up, not renovated, but demolished, disintegrated like the phoenix rising from the ashes. We have to rebuild it. So what dies is us using spirituality or anything else, drugs, alcohol, whatever you use, toxic relationships as an escape. Meditation happen as dissociation, meditating high vibe only as emotional, spiritually and psychological form of bypassing, and the belief that consciousness makes you immune to human suffering, the fantasy that if you just get enlightened enough you don't need anyone. And what's being built is practices that include your raised devotion that doesn't bypass your need for therapy, mysticism that pays the rent, and compassion that starts with yourself, and spiritual discipline that doesn't punish your body, and this might mean admitting you use meditation to avoid feeling or any other spiritual practice to do that, recognizing that your trust of universe approach has left you financially and otherwise, unstable, acknowledging that your spiritual community isn't a replacement for professional mental health support, and building a practice that serves your actual life, not just your fantasy one. In terms of your educational, intellectual development, it's learning what you actually need. You've been collecting knowledge like spiritual Pokemon, right? Another course, another certification, another technique, but have you integrated any of it, or are you just using learning as a way to avoid the doing? This transit says stop accumulating, gathering, and start integrating. You don't need more information, you need to embody, live what you already know. And what learns is learning as a form of procrastination, certification as proof of worth, the belief that if you just take one more course then you'll be ready to start. And what's being built is education that serves action, learning that leads to, embodiment, living the theory, intellectual development that includes practical application, the doing, the being, the living, and study that doesn't replace the living, right? And this might mean finishing the course you're in before starting another, actually using your certifications instead of collecting more, building something with what you have learned instead of learning more to avoid building, right? So in terms of your professional career development, it's mysticism that makes money. So the spiritual career fantasy dissolving, the one where you do what you love and the money follows you and you never have to compromise your values or do anything that feels like selling out. The reality check that Saturn conjunction to Neptune is bringing, right, is spiritual work is still work. If you want to make a living doing this, you need to structure and routine your life in a way, have strategy, systems, marketing, boundaries and invoices. You can be mystical and send payment reminders. You can be devoted to practice and track your expenses. And what dies is the fantasy that if your work is spiritual enough, you won't have to deal with money. The belief that charging for your gifts is capitalizing on spirituality. The resistance to actually building a business instead of just offering your services. And what's being built is a sustainable long-term practice, professional boundaries, pricing that reflects value, systems that support your work instead of draining you, the structure, routines that lets you keep doing this long term, and this might mean hiring an accountant even though it feels too corporate, rising your prices even though you're scared people will leave, building an actual business plan instead of just trusting it will work out, creating the infrastructure, the routine that supports your gifts instead of, burning you out and draining you. So in terms of how this lands in our connections, our relationship, I'm going to, do the relationship deep dive now. So in intimate partnerships, we're being asked, can you be spiritual and need couples therapy? As I said, it's exposing where we've been spiritually bypassing conflict, facing the home truths in our relationships, right? The we never fight, that's actually we never communicate honestly. As I said, there were twin flames, that's avoiding the reality that you trigger each other's wounds and need professional help processing them, or the fantasy, if you're spiritually compatible, the relationships would be easy, you should just know what each other needs, and conflict means that you're not aligned, and the reality is healthy relationships include healthy conflict. Love includes disagreement. Spiritual partnership still requires communication skills, boundaries, repair work, and sometimes professional mediation, So what this transit asks, can you stay in a relationship while the fantasy dissolves? Can you be soulmates and still need help? Can the partnership be sacred and require support, from outside systems and structures like therapy? Can you love someone and set boundaries that they don't like, right? Because oftentimes, we all got different needs and temperaments, and love is accepting the person for who they are. And then if you cannot do that, maybe you don't love them, not who we want them to be, but who they actually are, right? So that's the question to ask. Can you accept them for who they are, right? Can you work with that? If you can't, then maybe you have to question the relationship, right? So in terms of our family relationships, right, maybe your family didn't get the memo about your spiritual awakening, and this happens because often, one person wakes up, and even if others wake up, sometimes we all wake up at different rates and speeds, and that's okay. That's how life's meant to be, right? So maybe your family are still showing up in the same way they always have, and you're realizing that you can't heal them, right? And this is asking us, Saturn's conjunction to Neptune is to heal without requiring that they change, that other people change, right? And realizing that you can only heal your relationship with them and to them. So what dies is the fantasy that if you just get conscious enough, they will change. The belief that your healing requires their acknowledgement and acceptance. They're waiting for the apology that's never coming. And what's being built is boundaries that protect you without cutting off. Compassion that doesn't require you to tolerate harm. The ability to love your family and limit exposure to them, distance yourself from them. Sometimes this is the only way that we can do and build our tolerance to them, and this is something that I've had to do myself, so I know a lot about, but it can be done, right? And also forgiveness, that doesn't mean reconciliation, coming back together, being in a relationship with them. Sometimes we do have to cut family members off and just accept that, we can't be as close. Our mother, our father, our sister, our brother, whatever, can't be who we want. Our children may not be able to love us in the way that we want, and we can't love them in the way that they want, and just getting real, like in the TV show Fleabag, where she says sometimes love means I love you and I can't be around you. So it's about building the structure, the routine, the boundaries that holds the mystery, love, without either one destroying the other, right? So sometimes we have to love from a distance, right? Which is a song by Garnet and Silk, I gotta love you from a distance. So in terms of friendships, we can look at who stays in our lives when we start performing, being codependent and people pleasing and all of that, because some friendships were built on our spiritual performance or other performances, right? The high vibe only tribe that only wants you when you're inspiring, the community that excels you, says you got to stay away when you admit you're struggling. And this transit shows you who stays when you're not performing healed, who can hold you when you're messy, who supports your actual growth versus your created version, right? And what might happen is some friends may leave, the ones who needed you to stay small, those who are their own spiritual bypassers, who can't tolerate your own honesty because they're not honest with themselves, let them spiritually bypass, and let them go. Let them leave, because you're making space for people who can love you whilst you're still becoming, starting with yourself. So yeah, if you are self-partnered, it's asking you, and it's asking all of us, even if you're not self-partnered, even if you are in committed relationship, our primary relationship should always be with ourselves, and this transit is asking, can you be the partner to yourself that you've been waiting for someone else to be? Can you be the friend, the mom, the sister, the daughter, whatever to yourself that you're expecting others to be, not in the self-love Instagram way, but in the actual daily unsexy way. Can you show up for yourself when it's hard? Can you keep promises to yourself? Can you build a life that you don't need to escape from? Can you be faithful to your own healing, your own boundaries, your own pleasure? Not because you're making the best of being alone, but because this is your primary relationship. And the lie that you've been living is, once you meet the right person, then your life begins. Until then, you're just waiting, practicing, preparing, getting yourself ready for the real relationship. And the truth is that this transit is revealing, right, is the relationship with yourself is the one you're in 24/7. Every other relationship is secondary. If you're abandoning yourself whilst waiting for someone to choose you, you're missing the whole point. So what dies is the waiting, the belief that partnership is the goal and self-partnered is the consolation prize, the fantasy that someone else will finally make you feel whole. So what's being built is devotion to yourself, commitment to your own life, becoming the partner you're looking for, for yourself first, not settling for your own company, but building with your own company, getting to love yourself, your strengths, your weaknesses, everything in between, right? So it's asking you, can you take yourself on dates, build a home you love living in alone, create financial stability for yourself, pleasure yourself without it being sad, make decisions without waiting for someone to validate them, be your own person to call at 2 a.m, be your own everything, right? So this isn't about not needing anyone. Humans need connection. It's about your primary relationship being with you. Everyone else is a guest in the life you're building, and if no one ever comes, you have still built a life worth living. That's not second best, that's actual wholeness, right? So ultimately, Saturn's conjunction to Neptune is asking us to become whole, right? So now I'm just going to give you tips on what to actually do. I gave you timelines before, but now I'm going to go into what to actually do in a bit more detail during these peak intensities and long-term integration phases, right? So during the peak intensity period, from February the 19th to the 21st of February 2026, right? This is the exact window. So don't schedule anything important. Don't make major decisions, as I said. Don't try to force productivity if you cannot be productive. Clear your calendar if you can, only if you can. I know life be life in, and this is what this transit is reminding us of. We have to, be spiritual within the day-to-day commitments, right? So if you can, take some time out to rest. Make sure you try to journal or voice note whatever you need to voice note to yourself. Feel without fixing. Let the old spiritual identity dissolve without rushing to replace it. Cry if you need to. Rage if it comes. Don't perform. Handling it well, let yourself, go there, go to the depths, remember the Nakshatra, the serpent. So, do not spiritual bypass. Meditate to escape instead of process, Use high vibe language to avoid feeling. Make promises you can't keep. Start new relationships or projects, quit your job impulsively or anything else, sort of like end relationships, if you need to end things, but think about ending and how you can leave a relationship, especially if it's a toxic one, right? So in terms of the somatic practice, lie on the floor, literally let your body weight drop through the bones into the earth. Remember, you're not holding yourself up, you're being held. Practice receiving support instead of performing strength. Between March and April, because the exact transit lasts 3 days but the integration lasts months, as I said, this is where the real work happens. So build your new structures, systems, routines, maybe it's a therapy appointment every week, or check in with yourself every week, not just when you're in crisis. Maybe medication routine if that's what helps. Financial budget that reflects reality, not fantasy. Boundaries with people who demand you stay positive. Set boundaries, say no. Make sure that your spiritual practice includes your humanity. If you're self-partnered, schedule dates with yourself, or even if you are in a relationship, take yourself out on a date. actual dates. Build a life you're excited to live alone or with someone else, Don't be like, oh, I'm making the best of it. Building what you actually want, whether you're single or in a committed relationship. Remember that the relationship with yourself is primary, it's essential. Treat it like it matters. Like Erica Badu sings, I'm sensitive about my sit right. Your practice needs to honour that sensitivity, not transcend it. So build, structure a routine that protects your depth, not performs in a vulnerability, right? So in terms of your shadow work protocol, as I said, do journaling prompts for about 30 days, maybe one per day, or cycle through all of these. So number 1, ask yourself, where am I using spirituality to avoid being human? Number 2, what am I performing instead of feeling? Number 3, what would I do differently if I admitted that I still need help? 4, who am I when no one's watching? 5, what spiritual identity can I just let die? Don't just read what you wrote. Notice the patterns, the lies that repeat, and also notice the truth that repeats about your feelings and what you actually want. So as I said, you can do somatic practices, ankle rotations, hip openers, breath work, box breathing, 4 counts in, 4 hold out, and 4 in again and holds, not to transcend but to regulate. Your nervous system needs this structure and routine. So box breathing, 4 counts in, hold for 4, out for 4, then hold for 4, maybe cold water if you can do that, bath in cold water, shower. It may be a bit cold if you're in Europe, right, like I am. Maybe just some ice water on your face for 30 seconds when you're overwhelmed. This activates the vagus nerves and brings you back to your body. Maybe a walk-in meditation, not to transcend or escape, but to be practical in the moment, feeling your feet, feeling your body, remembering that you're here, you're a human, right? Not to transcend into higher consciousness, but to live in the body. It's not about rising above your body. Remember, it's about coming home to your body, right? So I'm going to talk a bit more about the wisdom of your body, right? So Saturn and Neptune conjunction in Pisces activates our different parts of our body, so we can experience immune system confusion, so our body can attack itself, autoimmune flare-ups because the boundary between self and other is dissolving. You can also experience lymphatic stagnation with fluid retention, swelling, the sense of being waterlogged. As Neptune dissolves boundaries, your lymph node system needs clear channels. Nervous system dysregulation, so you can feel more anxiety, panic, the feeling of drowning whilst on dry land, because your system can't tell if you're safe. Your addictive patterns, you can be more prone to using substances, behaviours, or even spirituality to escape, living it and life. So Neptune shadow is the desire not to be here, so we need to, watch out for that. You can also experience more chronic fatigue, just feeling exhausted and burnout, by holding the spiritual performance that your body knows is a lie. So remember that, whether if you feel nervous system dysregulation, lymphatic stagnation, immune system confusion, of course these can be conditions you have, or they can just intensify. Remember, it isn't psychosomatic, this is somatic. Your body during this time can be telling you what your mind won't, so just listen to your body, try and be more in tune with your body, right? So as I said, the Sabian degrees activate different part of your body. So to talk about that a bit more deeper, your ankle bone, check your foundation, how you walk literally. Are your feet properly supported? Do you need better shoes? Different movement patterns, the bone that bears weight, of the whole body needs care, so look after it. In terms of looking after your knee, stability and receiving, if your knees hurt, ask, where am I collapsing when power comes towards me? Where am I locking up instead of staying engaged? In terms of looking after your hip bone, your range of motion, hip tightness often means you're stuck between moving forward and staying put. So, just look after your hip and do your energies to loosen it, and also, think of ways that you resisted moving forward, and in what ways that you're, staying in your comfort zone as well. In terms of your facial tension, teeth grinding and stuff like that. Maybe you're performing an expression that doesn't match what's real inside, and your face can know. And of course, we have to sometimes put the mask in public because we don't want people to take advantage of, also burden them with our stuff. But when we're alone with ourselves, do that mirror work and check your face expressions, and in terms of your pelvic floor, your creative sexual energy. If this area feels numb, collapsed or painfully tight, think of the ways that you've hidden your power to be spiritual, bring it back. So the main lesson of Saturn conjunct Neptune is bringing back our power to regulate your nervous system, because your nervous system is the structure routine. That's Saturn, that holds your consciousness, which is Neptune. So when the structure routine dissolves, you can feel unsafe even when you're not in danger, right? So to regulate your nervous system, you can do vagal toning such as humming, singing, gargling, and this activates your parasympathetic response, right? You can also do bilateral stimulation, so alternating taps on your knees, shoulders, or wherever, and this helps you process feeling overwhelmed. Use weighted blankets, this is when external structure routine, the weighted blanket and other tools can be used when internal structure feels kind of weak. You can also try co-regulation, find someone whose nervous system is regulated, sit with them, and your system can choose just someone who's always calm. You can also seek out professional support if you are constantly dysregulated, and that's not a spiritual failing, that's your nervous system asking for help. So therapy, medication if needed, body work, actual support, as you can't meditate your way out of nervous system dysregulation always. It's all about a holistic approach to healing, and you can need material interventions, and remember, that's not failure, that's reality, right? So now I'm just going to give guidance for all 12 sun, moon and rising signs. For Aries, this transit activates the 12th house of the unconscious, hidden patterns, what operates beneath awareness, right? And your spiritual practice needs to be changed. What you thought was meditation might be dissociation, so it's time to get honest. Taurus, this conjunction lands in your 11th house of community, right? So your future vision, collective work, your spiritual community might not survive your honesty. The ones who need you to stay small will leave, let them. Remember, you're building something real, right? So Gemini, your 10th house of career, public life and reputation, the spiritual career fantasy dissolving. If you want to make this a profession, you will need structure and routine and a strategy, using and invoices and all of that, mysticism that can pay the bills, right? Cancer, your 9th house of philosophy, belief systems, higher education. Everything you thought was true about spirituality is being questioned, not to destroy your faith but to build something grounded. Can your beliefs include your humanity? Leo, your 8th house of shadow, transformation, shared resources. The spiritual identity built on being special is dying. What remains when you stop performing heal? Can you be powerful and still need help? Virgo, the 7th house of partnerships, one-on-one relationships. If you're partnered, you're being asked, can the relationship be sacred and need couples therapy? If you are self-partnered, can you be the partner to yourself you've been waiting for? Libra, the 6th house of daily practice, health and service is being activated for you guys. So the spiritual routine that was actually avoidance is being exposed. Build practices that serve your actual life, not your fantasy life, right? And seek out medicine, therapy, actual support if needed. Scorpio, your 5th house of creativity, pleasure, self-expression is being highlighted. Have you spiritualized pleasure out of reach, made it too sacred to actually enjoy? Your power isn't in transcending desire, going beyond it, it's in living it right, embodying it. So Sagittarius, your 4th house of home, family, roots, the ancestral patterns around spirituality are being restructured. Can you have faith and boundaries, devotion and limits, beliefs that include your body? Capricorn, the 3rd house of communication, learning, daily environment is being activated, so they're asking you to stop collecting spiritual knowledge and start living it. You don't need another course, you don't need to use what you already know. Aquarius, your 2nd house of values, resources, self-worth, what you valued is being restructured and routine. Can your spiritual practice include financial stability? Can you honour mystery and pay the rent on time? Pisces, your 1st house of identity, self-concept, how you move through the world. This is your transit because Saturn and Pisces are both in Pisces, right? So the spiritual identity you've performed is dissolving. Who are you when you're not transcending? And when you're just here, that's the you that you need to tune into, right? So now I'm just going to end up with some final questions that you can ask yourself during this transit, and then, do the final conclusion. So, don't rush these questions. Sit with one per day. Write what comes to mind. No performing good answers. So, you can ask, where am I using spirituality to avoid being human? Be specific, name the practice, name what it helps you to not feel. So what am I performing instead of actually feeling? So you're performing being healed, fine, grateful, high vibe. What performance can you drop? Number 3, if I admitted I still need help, what would I ask for? Therapy, medication, professional support, money, connection, name it. Number 4, what spiritual identity is ready to die? The peaceful one, the healed one, the teacher, the guru, what mass is cracking? Number 5, can my practice include my rage, my doubt, my medication, my human limits, or does it only work when I'm performing enlightened? Number 6, what will change if I start waiting for perfect conditions? For the right partner, the right income, the right level of healed. What if you built now with what is? Number 7, if the relationship with mystery self is primary, you're number 1, how am I treating my primary partner? How are you treating yourself? Would you tolerate how you treat yourself if someone else treated you that way? That's the question to ask. And number 8, what's one material action, practical action that you can take this week, that supports my spiritual practice? Not another, meditation, not another course, but what material, practical routine, maybe a therapy appointment, making a budget, making a boundary. Sit with these questions, don't perform the answers, fill them, because that's the energy of Saturn's conjunction to Neptune, And I just want to say, that this analysis is based on the transit, not your natal chart, So for professional guidance, consult your birth chart with these transits overlaid, or look at the actual transits to your natal chart, because this could be more or less intense for you, right? So all in all, Saturn's conjunction to Neptune on the 20th of February isn't just another spiritual test. This isn't the universe giving you a growth opportunity. This is where, structure, routine meets dissolution, letting go, reality meeting fantasy, the material world demanding you stop transcending and start integrating, reminding you that you can't just meditate your way out of everything, you can't just manifest your way through, you have to feel it, you have to build with it, let the old die, construct the new from, the bedrock, the nothing, the ashes, right? Allowing yourself to, feel, to, sort of like disintegrate, to be real with yourself. And it reminds us of the lie that we've been living, that spirituality means rising above your humanity, right? And the truth is that this transit reveals that spirituality that excludes your humanity isn't spiritual, it's disassociation. Integration, not transcendence. Embodiment, not escape. Structure and routine that serves your mystery. Mystery that includes your body, your bills, your very human limits, right? And that's the real work, becoming real. Not perfect, not healed, not enlightened, or just real, right? So yeah, I'm Imani, your holistic, astrological, karmic life coach, and this has been my pleasure in bringing this conjunction to you, right? So yeah, see you in the next one. Take care, guys, and remember, it's okay to feel. So yeah, take care.